Hey everybody, my name is Jake and I'm here at Mobius Science Center, and we are doing a flower dissection today. So the thing about a dissection is that maybe none of you have heard of what a dissection is, but a dissection is when we take something apart. And so the difference between dissecting a flower and just plucking the petals off and making wishes or whatever you're doing is that we're going to learn about what's inside of a flower, what parts it has, and how it works. So we're going to look at a couple of different examples of a flower, and then we're going to use those parts of a flower to make a little art project. And then we're going to, since we've dissected our flower, we're going to make a model using some of the materials in our kit so that we can have something to show what you learned today. So in your kit, you've got the materials for that model and some directions on how that's going to work, how all the activities are going to work. And if you have time after the video or in your free time later, you can make your own little art project out of your dissected flower. But I'll try and come up with a few creative ideas as best I can. But the first thing we're going to do is we are going to read a story. So I've got a story here, and I'm going to switch over to my screen so that you can see the book that we're about to read. This is called 10 Magic Butterflies, and it's a book by Danica McKellar, who writes a lot of very interesting STEM books. And this one has a little bit of math in it. Don't worry, I'm not going to trick you into doing math. We're just going to stick to science today. Check this one out from your library. It's one of my favorites. And we are going to get started now on our dissection. So looking at the flowers, there's lots of different types of flowers in this book. They all have different colorful petals and nice vibrant colors in this book. And I put in the activity guide a few different types of flowers that you can look for. And there's a diagram in there, and this diagram is kind of generic. So the parts of the flower that we're going to look for are mainly the petals and the pistil in the middle and the stamen, which should have some pollen on it. You might have sepal, which are leaves surrounding the petals, and then the leaves and stem, and we'll take all that apart. So the example that I got at the store is a lily. And lilies are beautiful, some people's favorites, maybe some people's namesake even. And this is one of the buds from the leaf. And I wanted to show you this one because one of the parts that we talked about that you can see on the diagram is called a sepal. And this is where we learn the differences between flowers. So a sepal is something that covers the bud before it opens. But in the case of this iris, these are the petals that just are so big and strong and sturdy that they support themselves before they open. So instead of peeling this guy open, I found one here, and we'll talk about how to start our dissection. So I've got a little pair of scissors. You probably can do a bit of pruning and plucking with your fingers. So right off of the stem of your flower, or maybe off the plant, you can carefully pluck a leaf or two. And make sure to ask an adult, what's photosynthesis? I'm sure you have an adult that has learned photosynthesis at least 1,000 times in life. So ask them what that is, and they will definitely recite it from memory, right? And then I'm gonna pluck this guy off of the stem, just one of them, so that we can see some of the parts. So for our art project, I'm gonna save a couple of leaves for later. Okay, and then you see these beautiful petals. The petals are, as we learn about how the flowers make new flowers through this process, the petals are to attract pollinators, all right? And so pollinators are bugs, and mostly bugs and birds, the birds and the bees, as you might have heard. And they are attracted to the flower to get at the pollen on the inside. So those might be terms that you're familiar with already. Petals of a flower and pollen. This one is very, the pollen on this iris falls off really easily, and you can see from having laid down on its side, some of the pollen has already fallen onto this petal, okay? So we're gonna gently pluck the petals away. And remember, the difference between just making wishes and doing a dissection is that we're learning about it. Okay, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Maybe you're already getting some inspiration for what you can make with your art project. And now we can see the different parts that are on the inside of this flower, okay? The outside here, the outer, well, the outside was the petals, but this next inner part is called the stamen. And each one of these stamen has an anther at the top, all right? And it looks like it's just balancing very wiggly on the top. And each one of these stamen produces pollen, and the anther holds it very delicately. As we saw, it just falls right off onto the petals of the flower, so that the pollinators, the insects and birds that come along, get some of the pollen stuck to them. And the point of getting pollen stuck to them is so that when they fly to the next flower, they can pollinate other flowers. They can pollinate and make new flowers. And the way that happens is in the middle, we have the pistil. So the pistil is nice and big on this iris. And at the very top there would be there's an opening where the pollen is collected, and it travels down here through the style into the ovary and makes seeds to make more flowers. So there's a lot of smaller parts, but the main parts we have in our dissection are petals, leaves, stamen, and pistil, and the stem here. So I'm just gonna cut that off here. And with our picture of this generic flower here, you can compare. And you might even see that this pistil looks a little different. Obviously, the stamen looks very different. The end of that stamen is very small compared to this lily, but it shows up best on camera this way. So we've got all our parts here, but before we move on to anything else, I wanted to show you maybe something that's more common in your yard, and one that I've got in my yard is a petunia. And my wife picked me some flowers for work today, so that I could do the same thing. So a petunia is different. It has one continuous petal. So as you take that apart, it's not a bunch of different petals. But this petal, as we open it, you can even see, zoom down here. Too much glare probably, huh? You can see the inner parts are very, very small versions of that. So the larger diagram is helpful, or comparing different types of flowers is helpful, so that you can see similarities and differences between these different flowers. So taking apart multiple flowers is fun, but taking apart different types of flowers is gonna be a really interesting part. You can also see around the edge of the petunia here, there are sepal around the outside. So when this flower was a really tiny bud, it was covered up by these little green leaf-like things. And in some flowers, the sepal are providing nectar. In other flowers, the nectar comes from other parts of the flower. And I wanted to show you really quickly, since your activity guide says one option is irises, I wanted to show you one other option to find information on the web. So this is from the US Forest Service, and you can see here that they've created a diagram so that you can see the parts of an iris. And the iris is quite different. They have nice, big, beautiful petals. And as we talked about the sepal here is actually what looks like another petal. Similar to the iris, those petals are protective enough to the outside of the flower as it's opening, as it's growing. So some of the petals, what we think are petals, are actually sepals or falls in this case. And the standard petals are in the middle. And then you would have to look very closely at how these smaller parts appear underneath the petals and the falls. So that's just one option. There are some public websites where you can find that information about what type of flower you have and its parts. And the interesting part then is, all right, what kind of flower do I have? What kind of flower did I find? Now, just a reminder, don't go picking all of your neighbor's flowers. Make sure you ask first before you pick. So to get started on our art project, you might be inspired by something that I could make out of all of my parts. And along with your questions, feel free to add into the chat something else that I could make with the parts of my flower. If you see a picture that's ready to jump off the page here and you're inspired to do so, type it in the chat and maybe I'll rearrange it later. But for right now, all I can see is, well, let's just go with a basic stick figure, okay? So what should I use for the body? Well, let's use the stalky part, the stem. And then these tiny little arms. And his head. Maybe those are the legs. Maybe it's a dress. Maybe I did that wrong. Maybe it's a dress. How's that look? So you can make all kinds of things, or maybe you see a picture that doesn't have quite the body that you're looking for. I've always thought when I was a kid that the petals on a petunia look like elephant ears, just the way that they flop around. So, because I'm not going to try and draw an elephant on camera, printed one, and we can take those parts and turn it into an elephant ear. So I just used part of the petal. You could trace this onto a piece of paper. Oh, now I've done it. You could find some parts, some stems, some leaves to make tusks or a tail, something stocky for his feet, or just draw the rest of it and add some accents with your beautiful colored flowers. So that's as inspiring as I want to be, because I want you to be inspired by the flower that you take apart. And maybe you'll need to dissect a couple of different flowers to really make the perfect art project. But now that we've taken apart our whole flower, we're going to get out those materials to make our model, okay? So as we started with our petals and stamen and pistil, we can make a generic one, like we can make a generic model with some petals and basic parts, or you can try and make petals similar to the one that you dissected. So in this case, I've got green Play-Doh here. I'm just gonna tear it into 4 parts and make them into round, a little bit rounded, maybe a little point on the end. Okay. They don't have to be. I'm going to give you something to work for. Make yours prettier than mine. A few petals here. Okay, actually, I got a little more Play-Doh left, so. Okay, and since we need something sturdy to make our model out of, we included a little cup in here. So this would act as the sepal as part of our model, holding the buds together before it opens. And I'm just gonna place the petals around the edge here. Almost got my fractions right here, sixths, as they overlap each other. Okay. And in the center of our petals is the pistil. And so there's a little clear straw here. You might have some color to your pistil. There might be some color to your pistil, so you might want to color that. And then we need our stamen. Okay, and so we've included some Q-tips. Now, I was told by my coworker that when I colored these with yellow marker, it looked like I used them as their intended purpose for cleaning out ears. So I would recommend using glitter instead. So I'm just gonna put a little glue on this paper and roll them in. A little glue, dip them in a little glitter. That looks better, right? That doesn't look like yellow marker is was not the right choice. I know that now. I know that now. Thank you, Katie. And after I dip these, I'm just gonna place them evenly around. My pistil's falling over. And the trick is not getting glitter all over yourself, or at least that's my goal. You might want glitter everywhere. So there is my beautiful flower model. And we're gonna remember all of the parts. Feel free to label them. If you have some toothpicks with little flags on them, you can definitely label all the parts so that you have a scientific model that you can add to your collection of things that you've learned. So there's my beautiful model. I've done some art, and hopefully you had fun doing a dissection today. Maybe it was your first dissection, maybe you've done it before. But we're glad that you joined us here. And if you have any questions, we're gonna add them in the chat, and I'll take some time to do that now. And just as a plug, if you haven't gotten, for those of you who are watching online, if you haven't gotten a kit from your library, contact your local Spokane County library and ask if there are still kits available, or information about the activity guide so that you can gather your own materials. As you see, most of the materials are easy to find at home, some art supplies, and responsibly picking a flower from your yard or buying some from the store and finding something that you can dissect to turn into an art project. All right, so I've got friends in the crowd who've dissected owl pellets. Maybe we'll take some time to compare and contrast, or talk about other dissections that you've done, or maybe we'll turn on our cameras here and share some of the stuff that we've been doing as we've gone along. Thanks for joining us.